Hi everyone, welcome to the I Am Noer Channel. This time, I will tell you a story about a legend from Egypt, Cleopatra. For that, let's take a few moments to detach from the hustle and bustle of the outside world and turn inward. Find the most comfortable position for you right now. You can sit in a chair with your back straight, but still relaxed, or lie down comfortably. Make sure your body is well supported. If you feel comfortable, gently close your eyes. Or, if you prefer, rest your gaze on a single point on the floor. A few feet in front of you, set an intention in your heart that the next few moments are time you are giving specifically to yourself. A time to rest, restore, and rediscover peace. Now, enjoy the story. Part 1. Alexandria, in 69 BC, was the most magnificent city in the world. The legendary Pharaoh's lighthouse stood tall in the harbor, its light guiding ships from all over the Mediterranean. In the heart of the city, the great library held scrolls of knowledge from various civilizations. However, behind the splendor of its marble and gold facade, the palace of the Ptolemaic kingdom was a nest of intrigue, anxiety, and conspiracy. It was into this world that a princess was born. Her father was Pharaoh Ptolemy, the 12th Algates, a ruler known more for his love of parties and music. His nickname, Algates, means the flute player than for his governing skills. His power was fragile, heavily dependent on bribes and loans from the rising power across the sea, the Roman Republic. The birth of this daughter, named Cleopatra, meaning glory of the father, was met with both hope and uncertainty. She was not the first child, but her presence was another asset in a dynasty, constantly threatened by internal power struggles and external pressures. Cleopatra's childhood was unlike that of most children. She did not play in peaceful gardens, but grew up in corridors where whispers of betrayal were more common than lullabies. The palace was her chessboard, and she learned its rules from an early age. Unlike her father, Cleopatra showed remarkable intelligence from a young age. As a Ptolemaic princess, she received the best education that Egypt's wealth could buy. The finest tutors from the Museum Alexandria's intellectual center taught her. She became a fluent polyglot. Besides her native tongue, Koine Greek, she learned Egyptian, Aramaic, Ethiopian, Latin, and many others. This was highly unusual. In the 300 years of her dynasty's rule, she was the first ruler to take the trouble to learn the language of her people. She studied mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy. For her, these were not just lessons but tools to understand the world and govern effectively. She was trained in the art of public speaking, a crucial skill for influencing generals, diplomats, and the common people. Her education was her fortress, her sharpest weapon in a world dominated by physical strength and male military power. The most important lessons for Cleopatra came not from books, but from the terrible real-life events around her. When she was about 11 or 12 years old, her father Ptolemy, the 12th, became deeply unpopular due to high taxes imposed to pay his debts to Rome. The people of Alexandria rebelled and drove him out of Egypt. The throne was then seized by Cleopatra's older sister Bernice, for Cleopatra's childhood instantly became a lesson in survival. She saw firsthand how power could be snatched away in an instant. 3 years later, her father returned with the support of Roman legions. He reclaimed his throne and promptly executed his own daughter, Bernice. For the young Cleopatra, this was a brutal and unforgettable lesson. Power was everything, and family could be the most dangerous enemy. She learned that to survive, let alone to rule, she had to be clever, ruthless when necessary, and never dependent on the mercy of others. From then on, Cleopatra was no longer just a princess studying in the library. She was an heiress who had seen the price of failure. She observed her weak father, who ruled under the shadow of Rome. She watched her country's wealth flow abroad to satisfy Roman bankers. A resolve began to form in her mind. She would not be like her father or her sister. She would not be a puppet ruler. She would use her intelligence, charm, and deep understanding of politics to restore the glory of Egypt. Cleopatra's childhood ended when her father died in 51 BC in his will. He appointed the 18-year-old Cleopatra and her 10-year-old brother, Ptolemy XIII, to rule together. The stage was set, and the princess who had spent her childhood learning from books and betrayal was now ready to play her own game. Part 2. In 51 BC, Pharaoh Ptolemy XII Elias passed away. In accordance with his will, the kingdom of Egypt was bequeathed to two of his children, the 18-year-old Cleopatra and her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII, who was only 10 years old. According to Ptolemaic tradition, they were to rule together as husband and wife. The fathers will also appointed Rome as the guardian of his children, a move that placed Egypt under the shadow of Roman power. From the beginning, Cleopatra had no intention of being a mere co-regent to her young brother. She was an intelligent, ambitious woman, aware of her own capabilities. She quickly took control. Her face was minted on the royal coins. While Ptolemy Xai's name was often omitted, she signed official documents without including her brothers. Name a clear statement that she was the sole ruler. These actions angered the high-ranking court officials who controlled Ptolemy XIII. Three of the most influential men, Pothinus, the eunuch chief advisor, Achillas, the general, and the tutor, saw Cleopatra's ambition as a threat to their power. They manipulated the young pharaoh to turn against his sister. Around 48 BC, this conflict reached its peak. Using their influence over Ptolemy XIII, Pothinus and his allies successfully incited anti-Cleopatra sentiment in Alexandria. They accused her of attempting to seize power illegally. Overpowered within the palace, Cleopatra was forced to flee. She was exiled from Alexandria and went to the region of Syria. However, Cleopatra did not give up. In exile, she proved her capabilities as a leader. She gathered a mercenary army with her remaining wealth and prepared to reclaim her throne through civil war. Egypt was now divided, with Ptolemy XIII's forces guarding the eastern border to prevent Cleopatra's return. Just as a civil war was about to erupt in Egypt, a major event in Rome sent shockwaves across the region. Julius Caesar defeated his rival, Pompey the Great, in the Roman Civil War. Seeking refuge, Pompey fled to Egypt, hoping for asylum from the Ptolemaic family. However, Ptolemy XIII's advisors made a fatal mistake. Thinking they would gain Caesar's favor, they killed Pompey as soon as he landed and presented his head to Caesar upon his arrival in Alexandria. This act infuriated Caesar. Pompey was a Roman consul and, despite being a rival, was still Caesar's son-in-law. Caesar saw the murder as an affront to Roman dignity. He decided to stay in Alexandria, occupying the royal palace and acting as a mediator in the conflict between Cleopatra and Ptolemy XIII. Cleopatra realized this was her chance. She knew she could not approach the palace openly, as it was heavily guarded by her brother's troops. So, she executed one of the most cunning and audacious acts in history. According to the ancient historian Plutarch, Cleopatra was smuggled into the palace by her servant, Apollodorus. She was wrapped in a carpet or a linen sack, according to some accounts, and carried past the guards as if she were a common piece of cargo. The bundle was then unfurled before Julius Caesar. Caesar, who was expecting a formal meeting, was instead surprised by the appearance of the young queen from within the carpet. Caesar, then 52 years old, was captivated. He was not only impressed by Cleopatra's courage, but also by her intelligence, charm, and political vision. That night, amidst the political chaos of Alexandria, they became allies and lovers. With Caesar's support, Cleopatra's position became incredibly strong. Ptolemy XIII and his advisors realized they had lost control. They then launched an attack on Caesar's outnumbered forces within the palace, starting the Alexandrian War. For several months, fierce battles raged in the streets of Alexandria. Eventually, Roman reinforcements arrived. In the final battle near the Nile, Ptolemy XIII's forces were crushed. The young pharaoh attempted to escape by boat, but it capsized, and he drowned in the Nile, weighed down by his golden armor. With the death of Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra's path to absolute power was wide open. Caesar reinstated her on the throne of Egypt. To maintain tradition, she was married to her younger brother, Ptolemy XIV, but everyone knew who the real ruler was. Thus, through a combination of ambition, intelligence, a hard-fought exile, and a daring gamble to win the heart of Rome's ruler, the 21-year-old Cleopatra successfully ascended the throne as the undisputed pharaoh of Egypt. Part 3. Egypt was a rich but fragile kingdom, always under the shadow of Rome's ever-growing power. Cleopatra realized she could not fight Rome directly. Therefore, she implemented a series of highly intelligent strategies, combining international diplomacy, domestic power consolidation, and effective propaganda. Here are the key strategies Cleopatra used to maintain her throne. Strategy 1. Forging strategic alliances with Roman rulers. This was the main pillar of her foreign policy. If she couldn't defeat Rome, she had to join them, or at least the most powerful faction within it. Alliance with Julius Caesar. Her relationship with Caesar was more than a romance. It was a mutually beneficial partnership. For Cleopatra, Caesar provided her with unparalleled military protection. The presence of Roman legions in Egypt ensured that no internal enemies like her brother's supporters dared to challenge her. For Caesar, Cleopatra gave him access to Egypt's limitless wealth. The gold and grain from Egypt were crucial for funding his wars, paying his soldiers, and stabilizing conditions in Rome. The most important asset, the birth of their son, Caesarion, was a stroke of strategic genius. Caesarion was an heir who had the blood of both Caesar and the pharaohs. This was Cleopatra's ace card, a potential to unite the powers of Rome and Egypt in the future. Alliance with Marcus Antonius, after Caesar's assassination. The Roman world was divided. Cleopatra needed a new protector, and she carefully chose Mark Antony, the most powerful general and ruler of the Eastern territories. They formed a strong political and personal partnership, based on a shared ambition to build a new Hellenistic Greek empire centered in Alexandria, rivaling the power of Octavian in Rome. Antony officially recognized Caesarion as Caesar's legitimate son and heir, a move that directly challenged Octavian's status as Caesar's adopted son and primary heir. Strategy 2. Consolidating power domestically. Cleopatra knew she could not rely solely on Rome. She had to be a beloved and respected ruler in her own country, embracing Egyptian culture and religion. This was her most brilliant strategy, distinguishing her from all her predecessors. She was the only ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty fluent in the Egyptian language. This allowed her to communicate directly with her people and the priests, earning their loyalty. She actively promoted herself as the reincarnation of the goddess Isis, a highly revered goddess of motherhood, fertility, and magic. With this, she became not just a queen, but a divine figure in the eyes of her people, which extraordinarily strengthened her legitimacy. Managing the economy carefully, she was a capable administrator. She efficiently managed Egypt's wealthiest, the production of grain, papyrus, and luxury goods trade. During her reign, Egypt was relatively stable and prosperous, which prevented the kind of famine-induced rebellions that were common during her father's rule. Eliminating internal threats without hesitation, Cleopatra was pragmatic and ruthless. When necessary, to ensure no more power struggles, she eliminated all potential rivals. Her younger brother Ptolemy XIV, who was her coroller, died mysteriously while Cleopatra was pregnant with Caesar. Many believe she poisoned him. Her rival sister, Arsinoe IV, who was exiled in Ephesus, was executed on Mark Antony's orders, most likely at Cleopatra's request. Strategy 3. Using propaganda and a strong self-image. Cleopatra was a master of public relations, or self-imaging. She knew how to use grandeur and symbolism to project power. The spectacular meeting in Tarsus, when she first officially met Mark Antony, she did not arrive as a conquered queen. Instead, she arrived on a magnificent barge with purple sails, rowed with silver oars, while she herself lay under a golden canopy, dressed as the goddess Venus Aphrodite, surrounded by her handmaidens. This was a political theater designed to awe Antony and position herself as a divine equal, not a subordinate. Part 4. The most important legacies left by Cleopatra. 1. Historical and political legacy. The end of an era, historically. Cleopatra was a defining figure who marked the end of several important eras at once. End of the Pharaonic dynasty. Her death in 30 BC officially ended the line of pharaohs that had ruled Egypt for nearly 3,000 years. She was the last ruler to hold that title. End of the Ptolemaic dynasty. She was the last ruler of the Ptolemaic dynasty, which had been in power for 300 years since its founding by one of Alexander the Great's generals. After her, there were no more rulers of Greek descent in Egypt. End of the Hellenistic period. Her death and the Roman conquest of Egypt are considered by many historians to be the endpoint of the Hellenistic period, an era that began with the conquests of Alexander the Great, during which Greek culture and power spread throughout the Mediterranean and the Near East. Key to the birth of the Roman Empire, the conquest of Egypt by Octavian, later Emperor Augustus, was the final step in the consolidation of his power. Egypt's vast wealthiest its granaries provided Augustus with the resources to pay his legions, stabilize Rome, and officially transform the Roman Republic into the Roman Empire. In other words, the fall of Cleopatra was the foundation for the rise of the Roman Empire too. Cultural legacy, transformation into an eternal icon. This is Cleopatra's most visible legacy today. Her figure has inspired artists, writers, and filmmakers for over 2,000 years. In literature and drama, she was immortalized by William Shakespeare in the tragic play, Antony and Cleopatra. This work shaped her image in the Western world as a complex, passionate, tragic, and powerful queen. Not just a passive victim in fine arts. Painters from various eras, from the Renaissance to the Orientalists, were fascinated by her life story. Paintings of her death, her meeting with Caesar, or her banquets with Antony became very popular themes. In film and pop culture, Cleopatra was one of the first queens to become a Hollywood star. Her most iconic role was played by Elizabeth Taylor in the epic film Cleopatra, 1963. This film popularized her image as a glamorous figure. With distinctive eye makeup, kohl eyeliner, luxurious jewelry, and exotic gowns, the Cleopatra style became a globally recognized part of pop culture, symbol of female power. In the modern era, she is often reinterpreted as a feminist icon, an intelligent and powerful woman who dared to challenge a male-dominated world and fought for her kingdom to the very end. 3. Legacy of myth and mystery, beyond historical facts. There is a legendary part of Cleopatra's legacy that continues to captivate the public imagination. Tragic love story. Her relationship with Mark Antony has become one of the most famous love stories of all time. The tale of two powerful lovers who risked everything for ambition and love, then chose death together, is a timeless narrative that often overshadows her political acumen. The mystery of the lost tomb. To this day, the tomb of Cleopatra and Mark Antony has never been found. Ancient historians recorded that Octavian allowed them to be buried together honorably. The search for their lost tomb is one of the holy grails of archaeology. This mystery adds to her allure, fueling speculation, documentaries, and headlines whenever a new clue is found, such as at the ancient site of Topasiris Magna. Overall, Cleopatra's legacy is incredibly rich. She was a real historical figure whose actions changed the map of the ancient world. However, she is also a canvas onto which every era projects its own fantasies of power, love, exoticism, and tragedy. Her ability to remain relevant and be reinterpreted by each generation is her most powerful legacy. Part 5. Cleopatra's influence on the world's perspective is profound and long-lasting, extending far beyond her role as an ancient Egyptian ruler. She not only changed the political map of her time, but also fundamentally shaped the way the Western world views power, gender, and the relationship between East and West. Here are the main ways Cleopatra influenced the world's perspective. 1. Shaping the East versus West narrative. This is her most powerful and problematic influence. The story of Cleopatra, largely written by her enemies Rome, became a blueprint for Western stereotypes of the East Roman propaganda. Octavian, later Emperor Augustus, launched a highly effective propaganda war against Cleopatra and Mark Antony. He did not portray it as a mere civil war, but as a war of civilizations. The West Rome, depicted as a symbol of virtue, discipline, masculinity, and order. The East, Egypt, Cleopatra, depicted as a symbol of corrupting, luxury, decadence, magic, dangerous seduction, and uncontrolled femininity. Archetype of the dangerous Eastern queen. Cleopatra became the prototype of the exotic, cunning Eastern queen, who uses her sexuality to corrupt good Western men. This narrative was so powerful that it persisted for centuries, influencing how Europe and America viewed Middle Eastern and Asian cultures as both mysterious and threatening. Too, challenging and redefining gender roles and power. The story of Cleopatra forces the world to grapple with the concept of a woman holding supreme power, a threat to Roman patriarchy. In Rome, power was the domain of men. A woman who ruled independently, commanded fleets, and negotiated as an equal with Roman generals was a threat to their social order because they could not accept her political intelligence. Roman historians reduced her success to mere seduction and magic, inspiration for modern feminist views. In modern times, this narrative has been reversed. Cleopatra is now seen as a feminist icon. She was a woman who used every tool at her disposal: superior intelligence, education, charisma, and yes, her personal alliances to wield power in a male-dominated world. Her story sparks discussions about the double standards often applied to female versus male. Leaders 3, illustrating history written by the victors. The story of Cleopatra is one of the clearest examples in history of how narratives are shaped by those who win wars, an image created by the enemy for nearly 2 millennia. The dominant view of Cleopatra was the version created by Octavian's propaganda. She was an amoral seductress who brought ruin to Mark Antony. Modern historical critique. Modern historians are now actively dismantling this narrative, showing that behind this image was a masterful politician who fought desperately for her kingdom's survival. This teaches the world an important lesson: to always be critical of historical sources and to ask, who wrote this story and what was their agenda? For creating an eternal archetype in culture, Cleopatra's influence on the collective imagination is immense. She created an archetype that continually reappears in various forms, symbol of exotic beauty and power. The Cleopatra look, with sharp eye makeup, magnificent jewelry, and distinct hairstyles has become a universal symbol for a type of beauty that is exotic, powerful, and sometimes dangerous. Blueprint for the femme fatale in many ways. She became one of the first femmes fatales, dangerous women, in literary and cultural history. A woman whose charm brought both glory and disaster. This archetype continues to be used in films, books, and art to this day. Overall, Cleopatra's influence on the world's perspective comes from her being a mirror. The way each era views her, whether as a villain, a tragic heroine, or a feminist, icon reflects the values, fears, and biases of that era itself. She forces us to ask how we define power, view gender, and understand the complex relationship between different cultures. This is what keeps her relevant and captivating after more than 2,000 years. Part 6. The relationship between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar is one of the most legendary blends of love, ambition, and high-stakes politics in history. It was not just a love story, but a strategic alliance that shook the ancient world and determined the fate of Egypt and Rome. Let us delve into their story. Act 1. The dramatic and unforgettable meeting, 48 BC. Their story began in crisis. Cleopatra, then around 21 years old, had been driven from her palace in Alexandria by her brother Ptolemy XIII and his cunning advisors. She was in exile, gathering an army to reclaim her throne. At the same time, Julius Caesar, the 52-year-old Roman general who had just won the civil war against Pompey, arrived in Alexandria. His purpose was to pursue Pompey and to collect a large debt owed to Rome by Cleopatra's father. However, he was greeted with the sight of Pompey's severed head, an act that enraged him. Seeing Caesar's arrival as her only chance, Cleopatra knew she had to meet him. But the palace was heavily guarded by her brother's forces. It was here she performed her most famous act. She had a servant roll her up inside a carpet or a linen sack and smuggle her past the guards. The bundle was then presented to Caesar. When it was unrolled, out came the young and determined Queen of Egypt. Caesar, a strategist who appreciated courage and ingenuity, was immediately impressed. He saw not just a beautiful woman, but a clever and brave potential ally. That night, amidst the political chaos of Alexandria, Their alliance was formed. Act 2. A political and personal partnership. Their relationship developed quickly, based on very clear mutual needs and benefits. What did Cleopatra gain? Military power. With the support of Caesar's invincible legions, she had the strength to defeat her brother's army and secure her throne. Caesar was her guarantee of survival and power. Legitimacy. The support of Rome's most powerful ruler gave her undeniable legitimacy in the eyes of the world. What did Caesar gain? Egypt's wealth. Egypt was the breadbasket and gold mine of the Mediterranean world. Caesar desperately needed this wealth to pay his large army and fund his political ambitions in Rome. Stability in the East. By placing a loyal ally like Cleopatra on the Egyptian throne, Caesar ensured stability on the eastern frontier of Rome's territories. Their relationship soon became more than just political. They became lovers. Caesar, who was married to Calpurnia in Rome, spent the winter in Alexandria with Cleopatra. They sailed down the Nile together, a journey that showed Caesar the splendor of Egypt and strengthened their bond. Act 3. Caesarion, the heir of two worlds, 47 BC. After Caesar helped her win the Alexandrian War and defeat Ptolemy XIII, Cleopatra was once again the ruler of Egypt. Shortly after Caesar left Egypt, Cleopatra gave birth to a son in 47 BC. She named him Ptolemy Caesar, but the people of Alexandria gave him a more famous nickname, Caesarion, meaning Little Caesar. The birth of Caesarion was the pinnacle of Cleopatra's strategy. Her son was now not only the heir to the Egyptian throne, but also the only biological son of Julius Caesar. This gave him a potential claim to Roman inheritance, a very radical and dangerous idea at the time. Act 4. Cleopatra, in Rome, 4644 BC. To strengthen her position, Cleopatra traveled to Rome with Caesarion and stayed in a luxurious villa owned by Caesar outside the city limits. Her presence in Rome caused a sensation and a scandal. Many conservative Roman nobles viewed her with suspicion. They saw her as a symbol of foreign luxury and corrupting Eastern influence that could threaten traditional Roman values. However, Caesar did not hide their relationship. He even erected a golden statue of Cleopatra depicted as the goddess Isis inside the temple of Venus Genetrix, an extraordinary and provocative tribute. Act 5. The abrupt end. The bright future of their alliance ended tragically. On March 15, 44 BC, Julius Caesar was assassinated by a group of senators in Rome. The death of her protector left Cleopatra's position extremely vulnerable. Without Caesar, she lost her strongest ally. The dream of a joint empire under their leadership was shattered. She quickly packed her belongings, took Caesarion, and returned to Egypt to secure her throne and await the political storm that was sure to come from Rome. The relationship between Cleopatra and Julius Caesar was a brief but decisive episode. It was a meeting of two brilliant minds, driven by equally great ambitions. Although it ended in tragedy, this relationship succeeded in placing Cleopatra at the pinnacle of power and producing a son who, for a moment, held the key to the future of two great civilizations. Part 7. After the death of Julius Caesar, the Roman world plunged into chaos. From the ashes of civil war emerged Mark Antony, Marcus Antonius, Caesar's charismatic and mighty trusted general. His relationship with Cleopatra would become the most dramatic, passionate, and ultimately tragic chapter in the Egyptian queen's life. Their story is an epic of power, ambition, and a love that burned until the very end. Act 1. The spectacular meeting in Tarsus 41 BC. After defeating Caesar's assassins, Mark Antony became the master of Rome's eastern territories. He summoned Cleopatra to Tarsus, in modern-day Turkey, to question her loyalty during the civil war and, more importantly, to request funds for his campaign against the Parthian Empire. Cleopatra knew this was a crucial moment. She did not arrive as a frightened subordinate. Instead, she orchestrated one of the most stunning entrances in history. She sailed down the river on a magnificent barge with purple sails, with silver-plated oars moving to the rhythm of music. Cleopatra herself lay under a golden canopy, dressed as the goddess Venus Aphrodite, the Roman goddess of love, surrounded by attendants spreading perfumes and scattering flower petals. Antony, who saw himself as a descendant of the god Dionysus, was immediately captivated. He cancelled all his plans and accepted Cleopatra's invitation to a banquet. With this performance, Cleopatra successfully positioned herself not as a conquered queen, but as an equal, a goddess. Act 2. A partnership of power and passion. Their relationship was much more than strategic. There was genuine passion and compatibility between them. Antony spent the winter of 41 to 40 BC in Alexandria with Cleopatra. They lived in luxury, held legendary parties, and enjoyed their time together. However, behind it all, their partnership was highly political for Cleopatra. Antony was her new protector, a powerful Roman general who could guarantee the security of Egypt and her throne from threats, especially from Antony's rival in Rome, Octavian. For Antony, Cleopatra's boundless wealth was the only way he could fund his large army and finance his invasion of Parthia from their relationship. 3 children were born, the twins Alexander Helios, the sun, and Cleopatra Selene to the moon, and their youngest son, Ptolemy. These children were not just the fruit of love, but also pawns in their grand plan. Act 3. The ambition for a new empire. Together, Cleopatra and Antony dreamed a radical vision, a new Eastern empire centered in Alexandria, which would rival or even surpass the power of Rome. The culmination of this ambition was the donations of Alexandria, event in 34 BC, in a grand public ceremony. Antony did several things that shocked the Roman world. He declared Cleopatra Queen of Kings. He declared Caesarion Cleopatra's son by Julius Caesar as Caesar's true and legitimate heir. He distributed Roman territories in the east, such as Armenia, Cyprus, and Crete, to Cleopatra and their children. For Rome, this act was an insult and a betrayal. Octavian used it as the ultimate propaganda weapon. He convinced the Senate and the people of Rome that Antony had become a slave to a foreign queen who aspired to conquer Rome. Act 4. The fall at Actium and the tragic end. The tension between Antony and Octavian finally erupted into war. Octavian cleverly declared war not on Antony, which would have sparked another civil war, but directly on Cleopatra. This framed the conflict as a war against a foreign threat. The decisive battle took place at sea, off the coast of Actium, Greece. In 31 BC, the large and heavy combined fleet of Antony and Cleopatra faced Octavian's smaller but more agile fleet. In the chaos of the battle, Cleopatra withdrew her ship from the line, followed by Antony. Their defeat was total and marked the beginning of the end. They fled back to Alexandria, awaiting the inevitable. A year later, in 30 BC, Octavian's forces arrived at the gates of Egypt. The story of their deaths is one of the most tragic in history. Antony received a false report that Cleopatra had committed suicide in despair. He stabbed himself with his sword. However, the wound did not kill him instantly, dying. He heard that Cleopatra was still alive and had taken refuge in her mausoleum. He asked to be taken there. Cleopatra's followers lifted Antony's blood-soaked body up to the mausoleum, and he died in Cleopatra's arms. A few days later, Cleopatra was captured by Octavian. After meeting with him, Cleopatra realized that Octavian intended to parade her through Rome as a captive in his triumphal procession, the ultimate humiliation. Refusing that fate, Cleopatra chose to control her own end. According to legend, she requested a basket of figs, in which a venomous snake, an asp, was hidden. She allowed the snake to bite her, dying as a pharaoh, not as a prisoner. The relationship between Cleopatra and Mark Antony was a high-stakes gamble. They risked everything for a shared vision of an empire and lost. However, it is their passionate, ambitious, and tragic love story that elevated them from mere historical figures to timeless legends. Part 8, of course. The figure of Cleopatra is shrouded in numerous myths that have developed over more than 2,000 years. These myths are so powerful that they often overshadow the historical facts. Most of these myths originate from Roman propaganda intended to tarnish her image, and were later reinforced by literature and films that prioritized drama over accuracy. Here are the most famous myths associated with Cleopatra, explained in detail. Myth 1. Cleopatra was the most beautiful woman in the world. The myth's image. The popular image especially shaped by Hollywood films like the one starring Elizabeth Taylor, portrays Cleopatra as a woman of perfect, unmatched beauty. She is depicted with ideal facial features, a sensual body, and a physical charm capable of making the most powerful men kneel to historical reality. Evidence from her time tells a different story. Coins minted during her reign show a woman with strong features, a prominent, somewhat hooked nose, a firm chin, and a prominent forehead. She does not fit classical Greek or modern standards of beauty. The ancient historian Plutarch, who wrote a biography of Mark Antony, emphasized other qualities. He wrote, "Her beauty, we are told, was not in itself so remarkable, ... but conversation with her had an irresistible charm. Her voice and her manner of speaking were so sweet. Her main weapons were not physical beauty, but her charisma, brilliant intellect, and captivating voice." Why this myth persists: Roman propaganda. It was easier for her enemies to explain why two of Rome's greatest generals, Caesar and Antony, submitted to her by blaming it on the magic of beauty, rather than admitting they were intellectually and politically outmaneuvered by a woman. Romanticism. The story of a woman conquering men with her beauty is a more romantic and simple narrative than a complex tale of political alliances. Myth 2. Cleopatra was a native Egyptian queen. The myth's image. Many people imagine Cleopatra as an ethnic Egyptian pharaoh, like Nefertiti or Hatshepsut, with ancient Egyptian blood flowing through her veins. Historical reality. This is entirely false. Cleopatra came from the Ptolemaic dynasty, which was of Greek Macedonian descent. Her ancestor was Ptolemy, the first Sotar, one of Alexander the Great's generals, who took over Egypt after Alexander's death. For 300 years, her family ruled as a Greek elite and often married their own siblings to maintain the purity of their Greek bloodline. In fact, Cleopatra was an anomaly in her dynasty. She was the first Ptolemaic ruler to actually learn the Egyptian language. This was a clever political move to get closer to her people, not because she was a native Egyptian. Why this myth persists? Because her title was Queen of Egypt. People naturally assume she was Egyptian. Films often do not make a clear distinction between the Pyramid Age and the much later Ptolemaic era. Myth 3. She ruled solely with seduction and sexuality. The myth's image. This myth portrays Cleopatra as a master seductress who used her body as her primary weapon. She slept her way to the top, seducing Caesar and Antony solely for her political gain. Historical reality. This is a simplification that demeans her capabilities. Her relationships with Caesar and Antony were complex strategic alliances. Of course there was personal attraction, but the foundation was political and economic. She needed Rome's military protection. They needed Egypt's immense wealth. Cleopatra was a capable administrator, a naval commander, a skilled diplomat, and a learned polyglot. She managed to keep Egypt prosperous and independent for over 20 years in a world dominated by Rome. This is the achievement of a stateswoman, not a courtesan. Why this myth persists? This was the most effective way for patriarchal Roman historians to delegitimize a powerful female ruler. They could not accept that a woman could be an equal to men in strategy, so they reduced all her achievements to mere seduction. Myth 4. Her iconic death was from an asp bite. The myth's image. This is the most famous scene. Cleopatra, definitely, takes a venomous snake, an asp, Egyptian cobra, from a basket of figs and allows it to bite her arm or breast, dying dramatically. Historical reality. Although this is the version told by Plutarch and immortalized by Shakespeare, many modern historians doubt it. Logistics. It would be difficult to smuggle in a snake large enough to kill for certain effectiveness. Snake bites are not always fatal, and death is often slow, painful, and unsightly. Not the controlled and dignified death Cleopatra would have wanted. Alternative theory. It is highly likely she used a fast-acting poison, perhaps a mixture of opium and other poisonous plants. This poison could have been hidden in a hairpin or jewelry and used quickly without leaving much trace. Why this myth persists? The symbolism is too powerful to ignore. The cobra was a symbol of divine power and royalty in ancient Egyptian culture. The uraeus on the pharaoh's crown. By choosing death by snake, Cleopatra sent a final message. She died not as a Roman captive, but as a true pharaoh of Egypt, reuniting with the gods. This is a far more poetic and powerful ending than simply ingesting poison. Part 9. Of course, after debunking the myths, let us explore the interesting and historically verified facts about Cleopatra. These facts paint a picture of a woman far more complex, intelligent, and resilient than depicted in legend. Here are the detailed facts related to Cleopatra. Fact 1. She was not Egyptian, but of Greek descent. This is the most fundamental and often misunderstood fact. Detail. Cleopatra was the last member of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a dynasty that ruled Egypt for approximately 300 years. The founder of this dynasty was Ptolemy, the first Sotar, a general of Greek Macedonian blood, who was a companion and one of the commanders of Alexander the Great. After Alexander's death, Ptolemy took control of Egypt. The name Cleopatra itself is a Greek name, meaning glory of the father. For centuries, her family spoke Greek and maintained Greek traditions. Fact 2. A linguistic genius polyglot. Cleopatra's most evident intelligence was her linguistic ability. Detail. The ancient historian, Plutarch, noted that Cleopatra was an extraordinary polyglot. It is reported she could speak 7 to 9 languages, including her native Greek, Egyptian, which made her unique in her dynasty, Latin, Aramaic, Parthian, Ethiopian, and the languages of other barbarian peoples. This ability was a huge political asset. She could negotiate directly with diplomats and leaders from various nations without needing an interpreter, which gave her a great advantage and showed respect. Fact 3. She was ruthless and pragmatic, including towards her own family. To survive at the top of the intrigue-filled Ptolemaic dynasty required a ruthless nature. Detail. Cleopatra did not hesitate to eliminate her siblings, who were considered threats. Ptolemy XIII, her brother and first husband, drowned in the Nile while fighting Caesar's forces. Cleopatra did not mourn his death, Arsinoe, for her rival sister, who had briefly declared herself a competing queen. After being exiled to Ephesus, Cleopatra convinced Mark Antony to have her executed in 41 BC. Ptolemy XIV, her younger brother and second husband after the death of Ptolemy XIII. He died mysteriously while Cleopatra was pregnant with Caesar. Many historians believe she poisoned him to make her son, Caesarion, her sole Kodash ruler. Fact 4. She lived closer to our time than to the age of the Giza pyramids. This fact helps place Cleopatra correctly on the historical timeline. Detail. The Great Pyramid of Giza was built around 2560 BC. Cleopatra lived from 69 BC to 30 BC. This means there is a time gap of about 2,500 years between the construction of the pyramid and the era of Cleopatra. Meanwhile, from Cleopatra's death, 30 BC, to the present day, around 2025, there is a time gap of about 2,055 years. This means, astonishingly, that Cleopatra lived closer to the era of the first iPhone launch than to the era of the Great Pyramids construction. Fact 5. She had 4 children with 2 Roman generals. Her personal life was deeply intertwined with politics, including her children. Detail. Ptolemy Caesar, Caesarion, her only son, with Julius Caesar. After his mother's defeat, Octavian ordered his execution because, as Caesar's biological son, he was a direct threat to Octavian's claim as Caesar's primary heir. Alexander Helios and Cleopatra Selene II, twins with Mark Antony, Ptolemy, youngest son with Mark Antony. After their parents' deaths, these 3 children of Antony were taken to Rome and paraded in Octavian's triumphal procession. They were then raised by Octavia, the Roman wife Antony had left for Cleopatra. Of the 3, only Cleopatra Selene II is known to have had a bright future. She married King Juba II and became a capable and respected Queen of Mauritania in North Africa. Fact 6. She was a published author and intellectual. Her intelligence was not limited to language and politics. Detail. Although her works have been lost, several ancient writers, including the famous physician Galen, mention that Cleopatra wrote several books. These works focused on the fields of cosmetics, makeup, and medicine. She reportedly researched medicines, herbal remedies, and even sought a cure for baldness. This shows that she was a learned woman with a genuine scientific interest, in line with the intellectual traditions of the Musam and the Library of Alexandria. Part 10. After our long journey exploring every chapter of her life, here is a summary of the story of Cleopatra VII. The last pharaoh of Egypt, Cleopatra VII Philopator, 69 BC, 230 BC, was the last pharaoh of Egypt, but she was not of native Egyptian origin. Rather, she was of Greek Macedonian descent from the Ptolemaic dynasty. Far from her image as a mere seductress, Cleopatra was a brilliant intellectual, a masterful strategist, and a polyglot who mastered many languages, including being the first of her dynasty to be fluent in Egyptian. Her journey to the pinnacle of power began with a ruthless struggle for the throne against her younger brother, Ptolemy XIII. After being exiled from her palace, Cleopatra made one of the most daring gambles in history. She had herself smuggled in a rolled-up carpet to meet the Roman general, Julius Caesar. This meeting gave birth to a strong political and personal alliance. With Caesar's help, she successfully defeated her brother and secured her throne. From this relationship, a son Caesarion was born, who became her strategic asset as a ruler. Cleopatra proved to be very capable. She stabilized the Egyptian economy, cleverly embraced local culture and religion by positioning herself as an incarnation of the goddess Isis, and ruthlessly eliminated all her political rivals, including her own siblings. After Caesar's death, she opened a new chapter by forging an alliance with Mark Antony, the most powerful Roman general in the East. Their relationship, based on passion and a shared ambition, aimed to create a magnificent Eastern empire centered in Alexandria. This great ambition brought them into direct conflict with Caesar's heir, in Rome, Octavian. After Roman propaganda successfully painted Cleopatra as a dangerous foreign threat, war was inevitable. A crushing defeat at the Battle of Actium in 31 BC was the beginning of the end for them. A year later, as Octavian's forces captured Alexandria, Cleopatra and Antony chose to end their lives in a tragic suicide rather than live as Roman captives. Cleopatra's legacy is immensely complex, a mixture of historical fact and powerful myth. Although myths often highlight her beauty and seductive wiles, the facts show that she was an intelligent and resilient leader. Her death marked the end of the Pharaonic era and the Hellenistic Age, and was a key event in the birth of the Roman Empire. To this day, she remains an eternal symbol of power, intelligence, tragedy, and resistance, with her story continuing to fascinate the world.